Okay, so again, why delta G is larger than delta C? Jiachen says that it's MPC less than 1. I mean, that's the phenomena, basically. What happened? Exactly happened. It's not wrong, correct, but what is the hypothesis behind or mechanism behind? Okay. Actually, there are two channels. One you learn in chapter 4. In chapter 4, we exactly done this before. We've exactly done this before. There is one day even in the TA session when I passed through the TA session, and the TA was explaining this to you in chapter 4. And the other channel is in chapter 9. In chapter 9, this is called the permanent income hypothesis. Okay. The permanent income hypothesis makes what? When the T goes, sorry, oh, right. When T goes up, when your wealth goes down, I consume less C, but this is a temporary shock, right? The T only increase in this period, not permanently increase. So I still want to smooth my consumption. So I can make C plum goes down by a little, and then C go up by a little. There is also a second effect we talk about in chapter 4. That's the consumption versus leisure substitution. Because actually I wrote it here. Delta G will make delta T goes up, and this will lead to delta C goes down and delta leisure goes down. Uh, well, actually, or if I write delta, it should be positive or negative. But so let's so G goes up, then T goes up, and C goes down, and leisure goes down. So some effect goes to the leisure, some effect goes to consumption. So the consumption decrease is not that much. Both this and the permanent income hypothesis will make sure that the C doesn't go down by that much. So although this difference is not exactly G, delta G, or G1 minus G2, it is not that. It's less than that, but it's still positive. Okay, and so the so-called complete real intertemporal model is that if you have the N labor demand, labor supply, you can arrive at the N and the wage, and the N will tells you why, right? And that's and leads you to the demand for good and supply for good. And there in that market, that will determine the interest rate and the equilibrium Y star. That complete the model. Everything's solved. Okay. So now I will talk about 3 experiments. What happened if something changed? And you'll find that I'm going to talk about, basically exactly what we've talked about before. Okay, the first thing is the equilibrium effect of a temporary increase in G. What happened if G increase? And what happened if G increase? I mean, or what event can be constitute as a G increase? Remember, this is a temporary increase because G plum doesn't increase, only G increase. For example, in the past 2 years, due to COVID, the government spent budget, an extra budget on what? To treat the pandemic, right? For example, the 5倍券 or 消费券, those money are extra money, not usual government spending. But obviously, you don't expect the same 消费券 or 5倍券 will come up next year, right? Or I mean, maybe there will still be next year. I hope actually, but no, not permanently increase. So that's a temporary increase in G. Okay. The first thing we know that G increase will make the output demand curve, because the output demand curve exactly has the G component in it. The YD. If you don't remember, this is YD will increase. This is what we just talked about. Okay? So Y will increase, will shift to the right. The total right shift, I call that delta. This change, I call that delta. And we assume to actually make the following calculation make sense, I need to assume that MPC is now a constant, less than one constant. Less than one, that means I used to say that the MPC, I mean, the function looks like this, the income and consumption. I mean, it basically looks like this. So the MPC is decreasing, right? It's constant means this is a linear function. Okay? And then we know that this delta right shift actually come from three sources. The first source is the direct effect of an increasing G from G1 to G2. We already talked about this in the previous slide. G1 from G1 to G2, the right shift will be G1 to G2. That's exactly that amount. But there's a second source, also already talked about it. That's the effect on consumption from the increase in T or T plot. So, I mean, think of it as just T increase. That makes the consumption actually goes down. But the consumption goes down by how much? It's not exactly G1 minus G2, G2 minus G1. Like Jiachen mentioned, that will deal with the will be related with the MPC, because you have, so that these delta G equals delta T, right? So the delta T, your wealth goes down by delta T, and your total consumption goes down not exactly by delta T, but by delta T times MPC. But delta T is delta G, so delta G times MPC. But this is a negative effect. It's a negative, so I need to put a negative sign in front. This two effect actually in this, not this one, this slide, I already mentioned these two effect. One is that G goes up, and then C make it go down a little bit. So, you know, the Y1 moves to Y maybe here and goes back a little bit to G2, to Y2. But actually, there's a third effect I didn't mention here. The third effect is that totally there will be an increase because of this delta increase, the right shift. The rightward shift, remember, the rightward shift will make y increase directly, right? This is delta. This y will increase by delta. And y increase means what? Means the pie will increase. The pie increase means the income for the consumer also increase. So there will actually be a wealth effect here. The wealth effect is that your wealth will go up by delta. And your wealth go up by delta. There's the wealth effect, income effect is that your consumption will go up. But again, by how much? Your income goes up by delta. You don't exactly consume delta more. You consume MPC times delta. So this makes C actually goes up. This makes C goes down by a little. This make G goes up. And make the rightward shift goes up. This make the rightward shift goes and this together obviously is positive, so make the right totally is a rightward shift. It comes from these three sources. But you see, there's a delta here. There's also a delta here. Confusing, right? Why there's delta in both two? This is like when I have an increase here, it actually increase here, but this will equal these three added up together. So in equilibrium, there's a balanced number that makes this equation to be true. So delta come from three sources. The G2 minus G1, the G2 minus G1 times MPC, and the MPC times delta. That's the total rightward shift, can be divided into three parts. And if you understand this, you can do a little bit tricks. Basically, think of it as delta G. And then this is 1 minus MPC delta G. And you make this to here, you'll see that you move this to the left-hand side, you'll be 1 minus MPC times delta. And the 1 minus MPC can cancel each other. What does it mean? It means delta will be exactly G2 minus G1. Remember, I assume MPC is constant, so these two are the same number. That's the key why I need that assumption. Otherwise, these two numbers are not the same. I cannot sort of cancel the 1 minus MPC out. So if I assume MPC is a constant, actually the effect is that the delta will be exactly G2 minus G1. That means what? This makes C goes down. This makes C goes up. But on net, these two make C doesn't change at all. So that the increase is purely from G2 minus G1. Okay? This is the most tricky part of this whole chapter, I think. So if you don't understand some of these, please ask questions. It's totally fine if you don't understand it. No questions? this is the last sort of session of this whole semester, basically, from me. I mean, I really expect you guys, I already hope you guys is going to ask more questions. Okay, and I sort of talked about this already, but the key success of your master life, your master thesis, all rely on how you can ask a good question. So if you cannot follow my lecture and try to ask question, you will not be able to follow like other literature and then ask some questions, which will become basically your master's thesis. Okay, so please try to, even maybe from the start, you do ask some simple questions. You do ask some like maybe a little bit stupid questions. Although I don't think any question is stupid. But then you will learn to ask better questions. Okay. So like I talk about here, the increasing G will first make the output curve, output demand curve shift right exactly by G2 minus G1. The second effect is that the output supply curve also shift right. That's why. That's why. Because the G increasing T, remember, is not just delta C will be positive, negative, sorry. Negative. Delta L will also be negative. That means delta labor supply will be positive. And if the labor supply goes up, the equilibrium labor will definitely increase. If the equilibrium labor increase, that means the output supply curve. Output supply curve is basically this. So this increase will increase the whole thing. So it shifts to the right. That's because the labor supply increase. And the supply curve shift is less than the demand curve. This is because the Wells effect on labor supply is small. Okay, because it's go to two channel, right? One to reduce consumption, one to reduce leisure. So the leisure or labor supply increase is relatively small. And if the increase of labor supply is relatively small, this supply is small, but demand is large. You will guarantee that the Y will increase and also the R will increase. So output must go up, real interest rate also goes up. And if the interest rate goes up, that means it will further increase the labor supply. Remember, R goes up. There is a UL divided by UL plum equal W times something like this, right? The R goes up. This needs to goes up. This needs to go up. Leisure needs to go down. Leisure goes down means labor supply needs to go up. So further increase the labor supply. But this is also small. Okay, because it has other channel. It's relatively, the substitution effect is relatively small here. So from the graph, you see first thing is this will increase. This is exactly delta G. And there will be a small increase of the output supply, which make the R goes up Y also goes up. And then labor demand doesn't change, but labor supply, first, this is due to the fact that T goes up. T goes up, it increased the labor supply. And then there's a second force. That is because R1 is increased to R2, the labor supply is further increased from N1 to N2. And wage goes down. So what is the effect? What is the effect of a increase of G? Increase the G. Remember, this is basically delta G. But the increase of Y is this. This is delta G. So delta Y is less than delta G. So spending 5倍券消费券 it will make the GDP goes up. But if you spend $10 more on this 消费券, the output will not increase by $10. The GDP will not increase by $10. Okay? And secondly, what happened in the labor market? In the labor market, the wage actually goes down and the labor goes up. What that means is you work more but earn less. And do you think the consumer is happier right now or miserable right now? Obviously, he's not happy. The welfare of the consumer will definitely go down. So, I mean, the increase of G, does that really help the economy? You know, that's really debatable. So output increases, real interest rate increases, real wages fall, consumption and investment decrease, employment rises. The investment decrease, I didn't talk about it, but it should be obvious. I mean, you can, because the real interest, I mean, after you check, it should be obvious. It's not really important here, so I'm not going to be go into detail about that. Okay. And government spending crowd out both the consumption and the investment. So investment decrease, consumption decrease. So G increase will let these two decrease. So totally Y is C plus I plus G, right? So this increase actually make these two decrease. And this is called a crowding out effect. So the government spending more is not really just spending more. It also make us consume less. And also make the investment bit less. What that means, if investment goes down, that means the future is even worse, right? Because I invest fewer right now. Like I said, the total multiplier, the ratio of the equilibrium increase in Y, delta Y, divided by delta G is less than 1. Okay. And if you study some like elementary Keynesian model in your undergrad, or you watch like TV news, you heard something called the multiplier effect or 乘数效果. Okay, it basically says that if you government spend $1 and then goes to some people, that people will spend $0.8, the other person will then spend $0.64, and totally the Y will increase by more than the G increase. So the multiplier is greater than 1, what I get here is the multiplier is less than 1. Why is that the case? That's because in the Keynesian model, the elementary Keynesian model at least, the extra output, how the extra output is produced, because it increased G, that means I need to produce more for you to consume, for the government to expand on, right? How does that extra output is produced? That's gonna be by more K in this period and more labor supply in this period. More K leads to less investment. More labor supply leads to less consumption. And the effect of the taxes on consumption, either on present or on future period, is not accounted for. Okay. Or put it in Professor Mao Qingsen's words. Basically, the Keynesian model, the elementary Keynesian model, assumed that everybody is a zombie. They simply reflect to the fact that I got more money and then I will consume more. The MPC is a constant and everything will, you don't change your other behavior. You simply consume more because you receive more money. Okay. But there's a school of economics called the New Keynesian economics, New Keynesian model, that is sort of the first time I learned that was in my PhD program. So it's really beyond this scope of the class. But those, they will assume like sticky price or wage, typically, and that will also makes the multiplier to be less than 1. And it also can fit the macroeconomic data, empirical data better. Okay, so but if you ever study New Keynesian model, you will find that New Keynesian model, although the name says New Keynesian, it is closer to the neoclassical model. It just assumes some sticky price or sticky wage, so that it is naming after the Keynesian spirit. But all the sort of model were closer to neoclassical. Okay, so even if you want to learn New Keynesian, the RBC model, or what we're talking about right now, this simple equilibrium model, 2-period model, is still a key. Okay. The second experiment we're going to run, this one is much simpler, is the equilibrium effect of a decrease in the current capital K. Okay, so K goes down, the current capital goes down. What will make that happen? I mean, this is really every day on the news right now, like the Ukraine. They are under a war right now. The Russian army bombing them. You can see on the news, a lot of the construction goes down. A lot of the factory goes down. That makes the capital goes down. Right? So what happened to this kind of war effect? Okay. First thing is the investment demand actually goes up because of the fall in K. The investment demand will go up. Why is that the case? My K goes down right now, but my investment decision is made by this, right? And K goes down will lead, because K goes down, then your 1 minus dk is part of the K plum, right? It will depreciate, it goes next period. K plum also goes down. K plum goes down, the MPK actually goes up. MPK goes up means you want, so it used to be equal to each other. So this is the benefit from investing. This is the benefit from saving, right? Remember? So this is more valuable right now. So I'm gonna do more investment. So investment demand actually will go up if your K decrease. Then because C plus I plus G, right? So output demand shift to the right. I increase. But the output supply curve actually will shift to the left because of the fall in K. Why is that the case? Remember, output supply is by F, K, and Z. The K goes down means what? The marginal product of labor is going to go down. Assuming a CRA function or the usual Cobb-Douglas function, you will see that. The MPN goes down. And the MPA goes down, that means it's less valuable for the firm to produce. Right. I haven't go to that part, sorry. Simply K goes down, this whole thing will go down. Right? That's the supply, output supply will shift left because this whole thing, simply because K goes down, the whole thing will go down. What I was talking about the next part. I go too fast. Okay. And so investment demand goes up, but the and so lead to the output demand goes up. Demand goes up, but the supply goes down. So the real interest rate definitely will rise, but output could rise or could fall. Not necessarily which case, right? Because it can be, supply goes to the left, demand goes to the right. It can cancel each other on the quantity, so make the output unchanged. If it's unchanged, if it could be unchanged, it could rise or fall. And the real interest rate goes up, like in previous case, it will lead to an increase of labor supply. Okay, but labor demand will shift to the left because the MPL or MPN actually decrease. That's what I was talking about. The labor demand actually goes down because I have less capital right now. I used to have a lot of factory, right? Now I only have half of my factory. I don't need to hire that many people. So my labor demand goes down. So labor supply goes up, labor demand goes down. And in this case, it shows a case where the Y goes down and interest rate definitely will go up. This is the equilibrium effect. So here also the N is unsure because if this goes down to here, for example, if it doesn't goes down by that much, it can be unchanged. So employment and the output is actually unsure, but wage will go down and the interest rate will go up. So output may rise or fall depending on how large the output demand effect is relative to the output supply curve effect. And the real interest rate rises, the real wages falls, but the employment may rise or fall. Okay. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the most important experiment. I mean, like what we did at least 3 times already, I think. That's the effect of an increasing current total factor productivity. And increasing Z, well, it directly shifts the output supply curve because it is Z FKN. The Z goes up, directly shift, everything goes up. And that, but the output demand doesn't change, right? Only the output supply shifts to the right. So it reduced the interest rate. Demand doesn't change, but supply goes up. So interest rate goes down and increase the output. And then the labor supply will actually shift to the left because the interest rate here is reducing the interest rate. Interest rate goes down. Interest rate falls, labor supply goes down. And labor demand shift to the left, to the right, sorry. This is also obvious because the MPN now is higher. The Z higher, MPN is higher. Right? Because I have better technology right now. So my labor is also more valuable right now. So on net, real wage and the employment both go up. And this needs to assume that the intertemporal substitution effect on labor supply is relatively small. Right? That means the labor demand shift labor supply shift to the left part is relatively small. So it looks like this. This is small from R1 to R2, and this labor demand is large. So N1 definitely increase, wage definitely increase. Here, the only change is the YS from YS1 to YS2. So interest rate definitely go down, and the output definitely increase. And if you can go back and check the empirical fact about the business cycle. Z is basically what I'm saying here. Z is positively correlated with Y, N, W, and negatively correlated with interest rate. And that's actually fit the empirical data pretty well. Okay, and there are three more experiment, like I told you, from the textbook. Wait a minute, I can't remember all of them right now, so I need to check my notes. There's one more that's talking about not the increase of Z, but increase of Z plot. So you expect to learn that the future, the total factor productivity is going to increase. This is also called a news shock. Okay, and this kind of news shock is also easier to derive. Basically, you should expect the interest rate to go up, output to go up, employment to go up, but the wage will actually go down. Okay, but you can check. You should be able to do that by yourself. This one is even simpler than the total factor productivity change in the current period. And then was one that talk about the recent financial crisis and tell you how the credit market friction is going to change the variable here. Okay, and basically assume that a more severe credit market friction will reduce the demand for good by consumer and increase the labor supply. And you will see how that will end up produce the results. And lastly, the last experiment that the textbook talk about is the sectoral shocks that we've already talked about before, the mismatch of labor market. Okay, and in that, it basically adds friction to the labor market. So the labor demand and the labor supply curve both shift to the left. Okay, if it both shift to the left, and also the supply of output shift to the left, it will end up increase the interest rate, reduce the output, and that increase in interest rate will then decrease the increase the labor supply. But that is a small effect relatively to the change, the increase of decrease of labor supply coming from the sectoral change, and the decrease of labor demand. So on net, the wage can be unchanged, but so it can go up or down, but the employment definitely will go down. So this also explains what happened in the sectoral shock. It may seem that the wage doesn't really change, but somehow the output decreased by a lot. Okay, and again, these things are actually easier than the 3 experiments that I've talked about in the class. So you should be able to finish them by reading the textbook. And there's one part I didn't cover in the textbook, didn't cover in the lecture, but that's in the textbook. You don't need to study it. That's the sort of asymmetric the asymmetric part of the lending borrowing market, so that you will actually the investment the borrowing and lending for the firm is actually going to be asymmetric. Some firm is going to be bad firm which doesn't pay back, okay, something like that, and which will add some friction to the credit market. And that we actually already talked about that in chapter 9, so I'm gonna to sort of skip that. Okay, but you also don't need to study that part in the chapter 11. Okay, so that concludes our chapter 11, and I will make a new assignment for you guys this week. Let's see, we've done 3 assignments so far. So there will be a 4th assignment, which will be due, I would say next week or a day after that, but it doesn't really matter exactly what day. But basically, I will give you sort of 1 week to write the assignment as usual. Okay, and just to remind you, you would rather not able to understand the question and write your own answer, and it might be wrong, you will still get 60% of the score. But if you copy the solution, you will get 0 points. That's a rule I specified very, very early in the semester. Okay, so please don't do that. Okay, it's really only harming you, not helping you. That's why I'm punishing that decision, that behavior. Okay, not because I want to punish you. Okay, so again, thank you for this semester. Oh, by the way, I can talk about that in Chinese later. But so thank you guys, and basically this conclude our session.